Imagine a hospital, right, where the very air you breathe doesn't carry the risk of picking up some new infection. A place with 0 hospital-acquired infections. That wasn't just like a far-off idea. It was a real energy. You could feel it at a recent meeting all about hospital at home. Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we give you that shortcut to understanding what really matters. We take all the complex stuff, pull out the crucial bits so you can be the most informed person in the room.
Yeah. And today we're really digging into the key talks and the breakthroughs from the 4th International Gathering on this hospital at home model. Think of this as your inside look at the momentum, the real push behind this, well, this evolving way of doing healthcare.
Exactly. And it's not some small niche thing anymore. It's global. Think about where they've met: Madrid, then virtual, Barcelona, Vienna, and this latest one, even more people from new places like Sweden. So it's clear this idea is really catching on. Our mission today, it's pretty straightforward. Pull out the biggest steps forward, the debates that are still going on, and where hospital at home is headed, all based on what was shared at this, well, pretty important symposium.
And right from the start, the feeling was just, wow, things have moved fast. The opening talk was literally titled, "We've come a long way, baby."
Huh. Where's that from again?
It's funny. It actually started with a Virginia Slims ad campaign, but then people like Billie Jean King kind of adopted it, for women's tennis progress.
Okay, so a real marker of we've actually achieved something significant.
Definitely.
And that fits here, doesn't it? This field isn't just like ticking along. It's in that early, steep growth phase.
Yeah, one presenter used the analogy of a geriatrician's growth curve, that initial sharp climb before things might start to plateau a bit. And the numbers back it up. Over 100 submissions for the symposium, right? Only 15 got presented.
Wow.
That says a lot about how much research is happening and, frankly, the quality. It's getting really competitive.
And it's not just the research, is it? It's the people.
Exactly. What's really striking is this new generation popping up, clinicians, researchers, educators, all really committed to hospital at home. It's a big shift. If you think back to the early meetings, a lot of it was just individual programs saying, hey, we exist, here's what we do.
Right, basic descriptions.
The conversations are way more sophisticated, tackling the big questions. How do we really make this work? How do we scale it properly?
Absolutely. And one of those really fundamental questions that keeps popping up is, what is hospital at home, actually? There's this big push for a common definition, shared language, a consistent taxonomy across different countries.
Taxonomy meaning?
Just a clear, agreed-upon way to classify things, label the different parts of it. So everyone's talking about the same thing.
Got it. And that's not new, this effort. Some of the pioneers, Michael and Victoria, they were talking about this way back in 2007 in Sardinia. This symposium actually had a specific session on developing standard ways to compare programs internationally, which is, vital.
Vital, yeah.
The thinking is, if we all agree on the definition, it helps build what they're calling a hospital-at-home learning health system.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
Basically, a way to pool data from everywhere, compare it easily, learn from each other, and just keep making the care better and better.
Makes sense. Okay, so shifting over to the clinical side of things, the meeting really showed how much the possibilities have just exploded. We're way beyond those first few diagnoses they started with back in the, mid-90s?
Oh, absolutely. The range of things being done successfully now is pretty impressive. And what's really interesting is seeing success in areas people might not have expected. We heard great talks on pediatric hospital at home.
Kids at home instead of the hospital ward.
Yeah. And oncology for adults and kids, even psychiatry.
Psychiatry? Wow. That must have seemed impossible just a few years back.
Totally. But the idea is maybe providing that care in a less intimidating, more comfortable place for the patient. It makes sense.
Yeah, I can see that. And it didn't stop there, right? Surgery, too.
Right. Growing use in orthopedics, bariatrics, even really complex cancer care. Things like CAR T-cell therapy, checkpoint inhibitors. These are sophisticated immune therapies.
The cutting-edge stuff.
Exactly. Being done at home now. I mean, think about that. Delivering treatments like that outside a hospital, that was almost unthinkable not long ago.
It really was.
And then you had presentations on transplants, OB postpartum care for moms and babies,
Okay.
infectious diseases, heart conditions, pressure sores, and a big focus on integrating care for frail patients.
It's such a broad range.
It really shows how flexible this model can be. And these aren't tiny pilots anymore. You mentioned the Atrium study.
Yeah, 20,000 people.
20,000. That shows you the kind of scale people are starting to operate at, or at least studying.
And we also heard about improvements in just figuring out who is a good fit for hospital at home, right?
Yes, refining the patient identification process. And this really interesting idea of hospital-at-home rapid response teams.
Okay, now when I first heard that, I thought it was for emergencies in the hospital at home patients.
That's what I thought too. But no, it's more like a mobile ER assessment at the person's home.
Yeah.
The idea is, can we assess someone having an acute problem right there and admit them directly to hospital at home, maybe skipping the ER visit entirely?
That's huge. That could really change things.
It could. And there's real progress in rural areas, too. We heard from established rural programs, and there's even a completed randomized trial specifically on rural hospital at home.
That's great to hear because access is such an issue there.
Definitely. Plus, lots of discussion on direct admissions from primary care docs, comparing in-person versus virtual check-ins, handling IV fluids, antibiotic stewardship, using antibiotics wisely.
All the practical stuff.
Right. Getting input from multiple specialists. And Michelle Grinman's work framing hospital at home as a choosing wisely strategy.
Remind me, choosing wisely is about
avoiding unnecessary tests and treatments. So, positioning hospital at home as a way to do that, to provide necessary acute care without potentially unnecessary aspects of a hospital stay.
Gotcha.
And we can't forget Sean Spina's research. Really solid work showing hospital-at-home patients doing just as well, sometimes even better, clinically, compared to patients in the bricks-and-mortar hospital. Bam.
Yeah, bam.
Yeah.
The comparison keeps coming up. All of this really highlights the team, doesn't it? It's not just one doctor.
Oh, absolutely not. Bob Wachter made a great point. He said, in traditional hospital medicine, maybe the doctor is the main unit of force. But in hospital at home, the team is the unit of force. The doctors, nurses, APPs, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, pharmacists, nutritionists, paramedics, therapists, everyone.
It's the whole crew.
It really is. And the meeting stressed how vital it is to train everyone better and actually value what each person brings. There was this story about a hospital doc initially kind of dismissing input from a paramedic who was right there with the patient at home.
Oh, wow.
It just shows you need that communication, that respect for everyone's expertise on the team. The paramedic sees things the doctor miles away can't.
Absolutely. Which leads nicely into technology, right? Because tech must play a huge role in making that team function remotely.
For sure. Technology is definitely helping bridge those gaps. David presented his top 10 innovations. It was a mix, actually. Some were foundational things, like getting the regulations right, but others were definitely cutting-edge tech.
Like what? What caught your eye?
Well, things like augmented reality, maybe, for guiding caregivers remotely.
Interesting.
Drones for delivering supplies, maybe. Smart pokes, which sounds like better at-home blood tests or diagnostics.
Okay.
Behavioral health, robots for support, AI sensors for monitoring. The new journal itself was listed.
The journal as an innovation, interesting.
Yeah. Plus specific solutions for rural care and models for low and middle income countries.
So a broad range of tech.
But the key point, and this came up repeatedly, wasn't just tech for tech's sake.
Right, avoiding the gizmo idolatry.
Exactly. It has to actually help the care, support the team. We saw real examples like integrating hospital at home into Epic in the Netherlands.
So fitting it into existing systems.
Right. Using machine learning in Taiwan to predict how long patients might need care. Better blood diagnostic tools for home use. Centralized tech platforms to coordinate everything. AI popping up in different ways. Automated medication dispensers like at Mayo.
Mayo's doing that.
Yeah, and using IoT devices and AI for really detailed home monitoring like they're doing in Singapore.
It's moving fast. But what about the person at the center of all this? The patient and their family.
Good point. That was definitely a focus, too. There was a feeling that, maybe more could be done, but patient and caregiver experience is getting more attention.
So what kind of work is happening there?
We saw studies looking specifically at patient experience in different settings, rural, PEDS, cancer care, sickle cell patients, also work using PROMs, patient-reported outcome measures.
Those are the questionnaires where patients rate their own health.
Exactly. Using those in cancer care at home. And progress-validating tools specifically designed to measure the hospital-at-home experience.
And caregivers, because that's a huge part of it.
Huge. One interesting thing was that the standard Zaret burden scale, which is often used to measure caregiver stress, maybe isn't the perfect fit for hospital at home.
Needs a more specific tool.
Seems like it. But there were projects looking at improving the experience for caregivers, both paid and family, even ways to manage when there isn't much family support, like in certain transplants, and research from France looking at quality of life for both the patient and the caregiver together.
Okay, good. And the money side? The economics?
Also getting more sophisticated, moving past just, is it cheaper? We saw studies looking at the economics of the UK's virtual wards, different payment models in Taiwan, and these value-driven outcome frameworks in Singapore.
So a more nuanced look at value, not just cost-cutting.
Exactly, which is crucial for getting payers and systems on board long-term.
And all of this hinges on it being safe.
Right.
Right, and high quality. What was the news there?
The safety and quality data was actually really, really strong at this meeting. Very reassuring.
Like what? Give me the highlights.
Okay, big one. Mike Mariachi's randomized controlled trial at Mayo Clinic, big study. It found hospital at home was basically equivalent on mortality and readmissions compared to traditional hospital care.
Right.
But significantly lower rates of hospital-acquired infections and fewer patients needing discharge to a skilled nursing facility.
Wow. Okay, lower infections and less need for S&F. That's a double win.
Huge win. Then there was data from Israel using propensity matching, a statistical technique to compare groups fairly, showing lower odds of both death and readmission for hospital-at-home patients.
Also very positive.
And someone described a poster as spectacular on integrating M&M conferences, morbidity and mortality reviews.
Where they discuss things that went wrong to learn from them.
Exactly. Integrating those right into the hospital-at-home workflow shows a real commitment to quality improvement.
That's important. What else on safety?
Craig Snyder's work on a safety management system using daily patient surveys was interesting, getting that direct feedback loop. And David Levine presented on a really rigorous study looking at total harm, finding big reductions for hospital-at-home patients compared to BAM.
Okay, so multiple studies pointing to good, even potentially better safety outcomes.
Seems that way. Plus, specific focus from Mayo on medication safety challenges at home, and Medically Home talking about their emergency medication kits, addressing the practical risks.
Okay, so the clinical case looks strong, safety looks good, but how do you actually do this on a bigger scale? Implementation and scaling must be huge topics.
Oh, massive. Colleen Hall had this great quote, "If you can't scale, you fail."
Pretty blunt.
Yeah. And Karen Hitchner's mantra was, go big or go home. Really pushing for ambition.
So how are people tackling that?
Well, Singapore shared some very real data on the challenges they've faced trying to scale up. It's not easy. There was debate, too, about the best way to organize it. Should it be like a ward within a hospital, a whole separate virtual hospital, part of the whole health system?
Different models being tried.
Exactly. We heard about scaling efforts in the UK, work on changing the culture in U.S. systems to accept this, a network approach in Spain, and the Hospital at Home Users Group has published program standards.
Standards are helpful.
Very. Chuck Poo talked about the U.S. Medicaid experience, which is important for access, and there were whole sessions on rural care implementation and, crucially, getting payers on board.
The money again.
Yeah.
Always comes back to that. What about future research? Where does the field need to look next?
They highlighted about 6 key areas. Training programs, how to best integrate trainees. Scaling strategies, still lots to learn there. Heart failure, specific outcomes, and best practices. The ACC consensus statement on hospital at home aligning with cardiology guidance. Dialysis at home, feasibility and safety. Understanding why patients decline hospital at home.
Oh, that's an interesting one. Why say no?
Right. And finally, really digging into the role of pharmacists, which seems increasingly critical.
Okay, quite a research agenda. Looking even further ahead, what were some of the bigger picture questions or maybe frustrations?
Well, there's definite frustration about that JAMA open network paper on hospital bed shortages.
One that didn't mention hospital at home.
Exactly. It just focused on building more traditional beds, completely ignoring this massive potential solutions sitting right there.
Like, hello, we can treat people at home.
Right. There was a real encouragement for people listening, maybe go online, comment on that paper, raise the issue, make sure hospital at home is part of that conversation.
Good point. What else?
Jared had this really compelling vision, hospital in any home.
A hospital in any home.
Yeah, he compared it to Bill Gates predicting a computer in every home back when that sounded crazy.
Yeah, seemed nuts then.
His point was decoupling acute care from the physical hospital building, making it possible anywhere.
Which leads to that question. What percentage of hospital beds should actually be hospital at home beds in the future?
Exactly. And to answer that, you first have to define the denominator. Is it just medical beds? or all hospital beds, including surgical, etc.
Given how many things they're treating now.
The argument is leaning towards using the total number of beds as the comparison point.
Makes sense. What about the patient voice in all this?
Still a recurring theme. Need more patient and caregiver involvement. In designing the programs, even in coming to these meetings, it's hard to recruit them, everyone acknowledge that, but it's seen as absolutely vital. Their perspective is missing too often.
Yeah. And why do we keep comparing everything to BAM, the traditional hospital?
Good question. The horseless carriage analogy came up. New things always get compared to the old thing they replace. But the suggestion was, maybe it's time to move beyond that. Talk about hospital at home on its own terms, its own unique value.
And linked to that, the language we use.
Yes. Big point made about not saying early discharge.
Why not?
Because it sounds like you're kicking people out too soon. The better framing is a transfer of acute care to the home. It's still acute care, just in a different place.
Okay, that's a subtle but important shift.
Very. Someone even floated a new quality measure. Total time spent in a bricks-and-mortar hospital bed.
As something to minimize.
Exactly. Highlighting the benefit of less time in the traditional institution.
Interesting. What about the home part? What makes home special?
That came up too. Where's the home and hospital at home? More research needed on what home actually means in this context, what its virtues are compared to the total institution feel of a hospital.
Right, understanding that difference better.
And fundamentally, the goal is always driving down harms, getting as close to zero preventable harm as possible.
Aiming high.
Especially keeping the frail elderly front and center in all these plans.
Which connects to the bigger picture of home-based care generally, right?
Absolutely. There was some really eye-opening data from Kaiser Permanente Northwest. They looked at their medically complex patients, especially frail, older adults. These folks had high rates of hospital use, high mortality.
Okay, not surprising maybe.
But here's the kicker. Really low engagement with regular primary care. Like 27% had 0 PCP visits in a year.
Wow, 27% saw their doctor 0 times, despite being complex and frail.
Exactly. They're falling through the cracks of the traditional system.
So how does hospital at home fit in there?
The idea is that hospital at home could be the keystone for a whole ecosystem of home-based care.
Keystone like in an arch. The central piece holding it together.
Precisely. Maybe the future hospital becomes more like a big ER or R and ICU for the really critical stuff.
While more routine acute care happens at home.
Right. And if you picture all the different home-based services, from help with daily living to chronic care management to acute care, like hospital at home, how a hospital at home is kind of crucial for making that whole system work, especially for reaching those complex, frail patients who aren't getting good care now.
It enables the whole continuum.
Exactly. It lets you provide that higher level of medical care at home, which then supports everything else.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And finally, you mentioned the new journal.
Yes. Really exciting development, a dedicated journal just for hospital at home research and discussion.
Where can people find it?
They encourage everyone to check out the website. They're looking for reviewers, people to submit papers, even financial support to get it really established. It's a great sign of the field maturing.
Definitely. Any final memorable quotes from the meeting?
Well, Ronan Arbel apparently said, with some intensity, I have a fetish for mortality.
Okay, that's memorable.
And Dan came up with washing machine admissions, patients just being processed through the system.
Paints a picture.
And then the classic self-deprecating line you hear at conferences. And of course, everything is my fault.
Always good to have some humor.
Yeah.
So wrapping this up, what's the big picture takeaway from this deep dive?
I think it's just undeniable progress across the board. The clinical applications have broadened massively. The tech is getting smarter and better integrated. There's a real growing focus on the patient and caregiver experience.
Safety and quality looks strong from the data.
Really strong. And people are seriously tackling the hard questions about implementation and scaling it up. It feels like real momentum.
It really does. So maybe here's the thought to leave everyone with. What if going to the hospital, the way we think of it now, actually becomes the exception, not the rule? Based on everything we heard from this meeting, that future, it might be closer than a lot of us think.
A future to think about.
Definitely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.